I'm going to hand off. I'd like to thank Rose, Jesse, and everybody at Christopher Guy for hosting this great event.
Thanks everybody. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Rose. I manage the showroom. And I'm very, very happy to host this event for you guys. I think you're a great group of people and a great organization. And I hope you enjoy yourselves tonight. And you have some great speakers about to give us a presentation that we can all learn from. George?
All right.
You're on.
Thank you. Like I said, my name is George Hahn. I'm a web designer. I've run my own one-man shop for the last 12 years. Before that, I was an actor/waiter. And I built my very first website in 2001 because I was an actor and I wanted to build a presence to showcase my work as an actor. I wanted to have my photos, my resume, my videos from TV and film work, and my contact information, my bio, because I had some kind of weird inkling that that's where things were going. And, you know, actor-waiter, it's not totally out of nowhere. I was a communication major in college, focused on ad layout and design. I was a pretty avid sketch artist when I was a kid, and always had a real appreciation and I guess an eye for the way things laid out, and loved to play with it. So when I would come home from like working a shift at a restaurant, I'd be up till like 3 in the morning playing around with Photoshop just to like come down. I did that to relax. So, nerd, really big nerd. So that very first website was really primitive. I wish I had a snapshot of it right now. But it was nonetheless a real website, and at the time I was thinking I was going to pay somebody to do this. And then a friend of mine gave me like a disk of software and a manual, and he said, listen, why don't you just see how hard this is before you part with money? And I hammered it together, and then other actors started wanting to pay me to do the same thing. And so then this hobby became a business, and I waited my last table in July of 2003. And I've been building websites for, not exclusively for people in the entertainment industry, although that's my history. I've been working a lot with people in what I like to call the audiovisual arts. Designers, photographers, people in film, recording industry people, people like that. People who speak my language. And so what do I want to start? I want to talk about web design, obviously, but I want to talk about something that's a very hot buzzword in the industry right now, and it's something called responsive web design. Does anybody know what responsive web design is?
No.
Crickets. Love it. Awesome. Great. I'm going to help you understand what it is and why it's important. Prior to 2007, all of us were encountering the web on laptops and desktops. That was it. That was the only portal into websites. And as designers, we were relying on a very static layout aesthetic that was really based in print. We were basing our aesthetics on magazines and newspapers. Static, you know, things didn't move. We could scroll up and down, but, you know, it was a static 800 pixel width website window, or maybe 1,000 pixels, depending on, you know, what we felt like designing for. And then in 2001, January 9th to be specific, Steve Jobs rolls out on stage at the Macworld conference and introduces this little thing called the iPhone. And everything changed. And it's like this. It's like, interior designers in here? It's like you have 1,500 square feet to design a living and working space for someone, a client. This person's going to sleep there, live there, entertain there. It's going to be a home office, needs a full kitchen. Let's say the job is also to feature something where they can sleep 2 overnight guests without bumping into each other. Entertain at least 8 people at a dining room table. Big TV screen, you know, a living space. You got 1,500 square feet to do it. Then the iPhone comes along, do the same thing with 400 square feet. I've actually seen that physically done, and it can be done, but that was the challenge that came before us as designers when we had to design for this little thing. You know? Because all of us have seen those websites where you go to the website and you have to pinch and spread because it's not a mobile website. You know, you go to some websites and I gotta like, oh, I can't see, I have to enter my name, you know, all that stuff. That's a site that's built for a laptop or a desktop. Responsive design is the opposite of that. And now I have to open my phone because I didn't unlock my code because I've got an outline in here. I'm trying to be really savvy for you guys. And then in 2010, we got another device. We got the iPad. So not only are we designing for 2 screens, we're designing for 3. And everything changed again. And actually in 2010, the phrase responsive design was introduced by a guy named Ethan Marcotte. He's a web designer. And that was the first time that term, responsive web design, was given a name. So what is responsive web design? Websites are built on a grid. And a responsive website is one where if you're looking at a website in a laptop or a desktop, and you expand or contract the window of your browser, whether you use Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, Google Chrome, you can see the content of the web page itself. If you make it really small, the content will reconfigure and reshape itself, and the images and the videos and the graphics and the text will realign to conform to the shape and size of that window to give you an optimum experience. Just like that apartment analogy with 1,500 square feet versus 400, the 400 square foot space does the same thing. You can have 2 guests overnight, you can, you know, entertain all these people, but it's the same thing. It's doing the same thing that the 1,500 square foot space is doing. Same principle behind a responsive website. We're not losing any content. It's a great visual and user experience for the user. It's no compromise in design quality, and it's still the same website. What came in vogue after the iPhone came out was like, a company would have, or an individual would have a website, and then they would design like a mobile version. So it was essentially 2 websites, and they would be maintaining basically 2 web properties. It was very sort of like, it was a cute workaround, but it was like at the end of the day kind of impractical. What responsive web design does is make sure, it's essentially 2 things. It's a flexible grid, and the grid is the thing on which a website is built, using flexible, fluid images and video, flexible multimedia. So again, like I said, whatever you're looking at the website on, whether it's a laptop, a desktop, a tablet, or an iPhone, you get all the content. It's just repositioned, and hopefully a very aesthetically pleasing way, to give you a lovely web viewing experience. Examples. One of my favorite websites is, that does this is a company that I use a lot. It's a company called Indochino, and what they do is they make made-to-measure online custom suits for men, and they probably put about 6 figures into this website. No matter what device I'm looking at it from, like I can customize my measurements. I can change my measurements. Do I want pick stitching? Do I want functional sleeve buttons? Do I want no belt loops? All that stuff. Whether I'm doing it on a laptop, or I'm doing it on a tablet, or I'm doing it on a phone, there's no compromise in the experience. I don't have to pinch and spread like we do with those sites that are not prepared for responsive design. Everything works beautifully in the same website no matter what device I'm using to reach it. When I reach it on an iPhone, it kind of behaves like an app. Sometimes clients say to me, should we have an app? I'm like, you really don't need one if your website is responsive, because your mobile experience on an iPhone is going to be very app-like. So that would be sort of like a superfluous expense. You don't really need to do it. Most people don't. Another great example of a really good responsive website, if you go to the Boston Globe's website, they were one of the first news organizations to do this. Every device you hit it with, it's a beautiful looking website for news. The New York Times introduced earlier this year, what I would call a responsive hybrid. They have a separate mobile website, meaning if I go to NY Times right now on my phone, it's going to redirect to an address called mobile.nytimes.com, which means it's not a fully responsive web design, but they're getting there. And it was a big overhaul. It was their first time in 7 years doing it. It was well overdue. But at the end of the day, what we've got every time we go to nytimes.com, whether on a desktop or a laptop, tablet, iPhone, it's a really beautiful, pleasant, informative experience. It's really wonderfully done. I want to talk about why responsive web design is important. It's math, statistics. There are more mobile devices being sold now than desktops and laptops. Mobile's outselling desktop. An interesting collection of stats for you. 91% of all people on the planet have a mobile phone. 56% of people own a smartphone. 50% of mobile phone users use the mobile as their primary internet source. And 72% of tablet owners purchase online from their tablets each week. And here's another fun fact. There are more mobile devices on the planet now than there are people. True story.
Hard to believe on the subway, right?
Look at what I'm doing. Look at what some of you are doing. This is how we're using the web. It's not going backwards. My own website, georgehahn.com. About 6 years ago, I could read my Google Analytics, and it told me that about, give or take, 8% of my visitors were coming from mobile devices. I looked at my Google Analytics this morning, and in the last 30 days, 41.7% of my website visitors came from mobile devices. And it's growing all the time. This isn't the future, this is now, really. And yet there are a lot of, you've seen them, I've seen them when you look at it on your phone, a lot of websites that aren't prepared. You know, it's a serious investment, I understand. So that leads me to like the last thing I want to talk about, which is cost. Specifically investing in professional design. I've built a lot of websites in the last 12 years. One big misconception is that once the website goes live, we're done. And actually the opposite is true. When you launch a website, that's when the work actually begins. The journey's only begun in terms of promoting it, in terms of getting traffic, in terms of updating and changing your content, blogging if that's what you're doing. The real work has only begun. A smart website isn't really a one-time investment. It's something that is revisited and reviewed by the owners. Do we need to make changes? What technology has advanced? How are people's behaviors when they use phones and tablets and computers changing? You know, up for constant review. My favorite example of that was, does anybody remember MySpace? Okay. MySpace, once upon a time, had the social networking world in the palm of its hand. Everybody was on MySpace, not just musicians. And they never changed the look of the website. They never acclimated to changing technologies. Even after years after the iPhone came out, they didn't make any big changes. Rupert Murdoch bought it. Not a fan of digital. He's a print guy. Didn't understand it, so never invested anything in it. And so they never really looked in their rearview mirror. They kind of played the too big to fail card. Everyone's on MySpace. We're good. No one can touch us. And then that little smartass from Harvard comes along and knocks out Facebook, opens it up to people beyond the school world, and look where it is now. MySpace did a site overhaul a few years ago, but it was like way too little, way too late. And we've all seen posts, we've all experienced ourselves on Facebook when Facebook makes a change, when something's in a different location on a page, we lose track of it, and we're like, why did they change that? Why did they move that? I hate Facebook now. You know, like, you know, Facebook's gonna feel my wrath with this stuff. There's a reason Facebook is on top, and it's because they're constantly evolving. Does everything they try work? No, but they're treating their website like a constantly evolving organic sort of thing. And they're investing serious time, resources, smart people, technology into Facebook.com, and it's kind of paid off, I think. Lastly, I want to talk about some design resources that are available to you. We've got companies like Facebook. How am I on time, by the way? Okay, great. There's a company called Squarespace, for example. There's signs all over the subway right now. And Squarespace is a great tool. You know, you can kind of drag and drop and build your own website for a reasonably low fee. Here's the thing with that. Since I've been doing websites, I would say about 30% of the sites, at least 30%, probably more, of the sites that I have done have come to me from individuals or small companies that already had a website. They needed an overhaul, and the guy or girl or company that did it was off the radar. You know, I need an overhaul on my website, and my ex-girlfriend's nephew did it, you know, kind of as a favor, and we were trying to save money, and I can't get a hold of him anymore. He's at junior year abroad, you know. 3 of the last 5 projects I've done have come from situations similar to that. You know, one was a designer who had an office assistant try to do the blog, and they kind of hit a wall. We kind of gone as far as we can go. We're kind of lost, and we have to admit that we're kind of lost, and we got to hire a pro. Yeah, you got to hire a pro. Another one tried to do it herself. I mean, I think you get my point. Whereas, you know, you want a real designer who has an understanding of the discipline. Not just understanding how things work on a technical level under the hood, but an understanding of how users behave. And also someone with taste. Like, you want someone who knows, like, what's going to look good on a page and why, you know, in terms of color palette, typography. And to go over those things with you. Even if you use something like Squarespace, which is a real great, as I said, DIY thing, I would suggest, you know, hiring a designer as a consultant to walk you through certain things like that. Because we've all seen a lot of bad websites out there. We don't need another one, you know. So that I would suggest. And I kind of want to wrap it up with, let me remind myself what I wanted to wrap up with in my smart little outline that George thought he was so slick at putting together. I wanted to circle back to that apartment thing with the 400 square footer. The thing about hiring a designer, you wouldn't hire a non-designer, non-professional amateur to do all that with a 400 square foot space. You need someone with a history, with a discipline, who knows what he or she is doing. The same applies with a website, yet people do it all the time. You know, trust a designer's experience, do some homework, ask around, and you want something with a responsive mobile design, because as I was talking about earlier, the way we're using that and optimizing a web experience for people who are using the web like this is not the future, it's right now. So hopefully that was some use to all of you. I'm going to kind of wrap it up right there. I look forward to any questions you have during the Q&A. My website is georgehahn.com. My Twitter is George Hahn. My real life handle is also George Hahn. And I hope I said something. There you go. So I hope I said something that was useful, that somebody got something out of. And again, like I said afterward, I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you for having me.
I opened a drapery workroom, and then I met Martha Stewart, and ended up writing lots of articles for that magazine, and then being on the television show pretty regularly as the fabric guy. And then after that, I started a company called CJ Dellatore Textile. I was first represented by Schumacher, and then Hahn and Sherry. And then the recession happened, and I got swallowed. And so I decided, before I did anything else, I needed to understand the internet better, and certainly needed to understand social media and content marketing better before I went anywhere near what I was going to do next. So luckily I was married to a banker who said, please figure it out. You know, go to work and figure it out. So that's what I've done. And now, unbeknownst to me, about a year ago, someone asked me to help them with their social media presence and content marketing strategy. And that led to the next person, and now I have a business doing that, which sort of happened organically and me trying to figure it out for myself. You know, I could talk a lot. I mean, social media, I could talk for hours.
Can you talk a little louder, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. I could talk for a long time about social media because it's what I read the first thing in the morning. But I think the two things I'd like to cover tonight are why it's important for you to be there, why it's sort of imperative for you to be on social media these days, and then what are the easiest entry points that won't suck up an entire day of your time trying to have that presence. I met with a designer a couple weeks ago who asked me, and I wrote a blog post about it. She said, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to be involved. I don't need to know what my neighbor's having for breakfast. And I don't need to know the puddle they're trying to cross on the street. And I don't need to know this. And I said, you know, in '98, I started writing for Martha. And then in 2001, Marian McAvoy, who was then the editor at House Beautiful, asked me to write for her. And I wrote 3 years of a column called Swatch Watch, which was about the latest textiles in the marketplace, which hers turned into a book, which was the first book I wrote, and I'm working on the second now. But here's the thing, in those years of working at in the magazine industry, I came to learn that magazine sales, advertising sales in magazines were directly tied to circulation. So if there were 100,000 copies on the newsstand in any given month, Hearst might be able, for the sake of argument, we'll say Hearst might be able to charge X amount of dollars for that ad space. And that's completely changed because as print media dries up and every publication on earth is experiencing print media disappearing, the circulation is changing. Because, like George said, we're accessing our content online. Those magazines have shifted a model. They're not so much concerned about circulation anymore. They're concerned with what are called click-throughs on links on a website. If you follow House Beautiful on Facebook, you'll see that every day, 4 times a day, they put out some sort of content that's to entice you to click on the link to see what they're talking about today. And that's because their ad space is directly related to how many people click through that on the metrics. So, if they write an article that says Charles Pavarini's kitchen this month is really sensational, and lots of people click on that link, their ad dollars get to go up in real time. It's not as if they have to wait month to month to see what's going on in circulation. They get to say, today we had 200,000 people click through on an article for Charles Pavarini's kitchen. And that means tomorrow we can charge Kohler X amount more money than we did today. And that shifts every single day. So I suppose you're wondering by now, and some of you heard this speech 2 weeks ago at the D&D building, when I talked about this, what does this have to do with me on social media? Well, let me see. Wendy and Rick, my friends up here. Wendy's on Facebook, for the sake of argument. She's an interior designer, and she has 2,000 followers on her Facebook feed. Rick has none, because he's not on social media. Now, I'm a magazine editor who's trying to make a decision with the publishing wing of the organization about who I'm going to talk about today, and I think they're both equally talented. But if I talk about Wendy, she represents an exponential opportunity because she's got 2,000 friends. And if I write about Wendy today, and she decides to share that content on her social media, that represents 2,000 more opportunities than Rick can give me. So if they're equally talented and I'm going to make a decision about who to talk to about, it's going to be Wendy. Because Wendy then shares it with her friends, and let's say for the sake of argument, 200 of her friends open that link, and 20 of them share it. And all of her friends that share it are interior designers, and they click on it, and some of theirs share it. Rick represents no opportunity. So now Wendy's giving House Beautiful or Hearst or Condé Nast an opportunity to make higher ad dollars. So, you know, I could talk about Pinterest, I could talk about Twitter, I could talk about, but I mean, I think the point of entry, I don't know, you would probably agree, would be Facebook. If I didn't have a social media presence, I would probably start with Facebook. Just because there's 1.19 billion people on the planet using it, and that's 1 in 7 people on Earth are on Facebook. So, yes, Twitter has 350 million people using it, but that's only 30% of Facebook's presence. So if I were going to start today, I would start there. And this is what I counsel people who are just getting a Facebook page. First, if you have a Facebook personal page, you can share your business content there, and you can talk about your grandchildren there, and you can talk about what you've had for dinner there, and your business stuff. But on your business page, I would only ever recommend you present business content. That's that word people say content is king. It's because the content that you present on your social media platforms, and for the sake of tonight's our discussion, Facebook, tells a story of who you are in a very organic way. And so I have this client, maybe Glenn Gisler. And what we do with his Facebook feed is try to share 2 pieces of content every day. And this is the second piece. Now, the first was why you need to be on it, and here's the roadmap, I think the simple roadmap to what to put on your Facebook business page. 1 piece of content that you create, and 1 piece of content that you curate every day. And the content that you create is an image from your portfolio, or something that you saw while you were shopping today, a tile that you're particularly fond of, a wallpaper, a picture of you in a showroom. That's something that you generate for yourself that tells a story of who you are as a designer in an organic way, in a real life way, because somebody's going to say, I want to know who Charles Pavarini is, and they'll go to his website, but second, they're going to go to his Facebook business page these days. And if you're scrolling that content and you see all the things that he's interested in because he was at an antique store and he saw something that was fabulous and he shared it, or the wallpaper, or a picture of a portfolio image that's buried somewhere in his stagnant website, but now it's showing up again organically in his news feed, you could attract a customer. That's the created content. Then I think the second piece is curated content. And this could be very interesting. Let's say Charles, for the sake of argument, really likes Fortuny fabric. Fortuny has a blog, and they have a Facebook page. You can borrow that content and share it on your Facebook business page. And it begins to, that curated content, things you're gathering from the internet, reinforces the story of who you are. Because Charles' clients are the kind of people who can afford $325 a yard Fortuny fabric. We need to talk about it on his business page because it reinforces his brand message. And that's what we're trying to do, is create a brand message on the Facebook feed. The other place to do it, I think, if I were going to do one other social media platform, it would be Pinterest. Because while it's not technically a social media platform, because it's not push-fed to you, you have to go there and search for it. It could tell a brand, it tells an amazing brand story for you. All the images of gardens that you find on the internet, you could pin to one board called Gardens, and your potential customer gets to go and see your aesthetic in seeing the 50 pins that have gardens that you've shared. The other thing that I think happens in Pinterest boards, if I were going to do anything more than a Facebook business page, on Pinterest board, is you get to develop an aesthetic which you may not even have known you had. Because if you were looking at every sconce in the world that were interesting to you and you pin them to a board called sconces, what you eventually have is an organic aesthetic right in front of you that you may not have recognized you had before. Things you're interested in doing that you never thought you might be interested in doing will show up in that feed of images. So, you know, again, I could talk about Twitter, even though I only have 900 followers, so I don't feel that authoritative in discussing it. I don't have the time. That's this humble thing about time. I don't have the time to invest in Twitter. It's a, do you agree or disagree? It's an all-day event.
It can be, sure.
I mean, the thing about, and people tweet things and I try to retweet them and thank them for doing all that, but it's a relationship building tool based in a mass text message. In real time. That's very true. I don't have that real time in my life. So if I were going to start a social media platform presence, I would pick a Facebook business page.
But if you link your Facebook to your Twitter, then you have the followers of Facebook overlapping the followers of Twitter, and you only have to publish to one.
Right, that's true. But there's a whole argument to be made about having unique content on each social media platform, that you don't end up looking like some spamming thing that puts out the same content on every platform.
You can also link all of your platforms, but you have to be engaged in each of those platforms in order to get relevance out of that.
Right, exactly. And ultimately, I think with this, you know, it's very interesting, all this internet nonsense over here. And I'm old school because I'm in my 50s. The reality is what all this does is facilitate interpersonal relationships faster than you might have been able to do anywhere else. Each platform, I think, is an extension of a different wish. Like if I were interested in communicating in the B2B community, I'm an interior designer who wants to begin connecting with architects, I'd be on LinkedIn. On the other hand, I don't know how many interior design professionals get clients out of business-to-business relationships being built on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a business-to-business tool. I don't see. Okay, you're going to disagree.
Cross-pollinating. It's a huge cross-pollinating, and people that trust each other as professionals.
I don't mean to disagree with you, but I am going to say this. We're focusing on Facebook, and the thing about LinkedIn, they just launched their news feed, so it's about to change. And I could focus on that if you want.
No, I'm not attacking you. I'm surprised because I'm close in age to you. And
do you have a business page on Facebook or just a personal news feed?
I have a personal page that's very private.
So you don't even have a business page yet?
I don't want one.
I think you can be a little bit more creative with Facebook as opposed to LinkedIn. I think that's where you're kind of going. That have a little bit more flair with
Each
Facebook.
network.
I have a presence on all of them, and there's different motivations for being on each of them.
Each network has its own strengths for
Yeah.
different reasons.
I agree.
Not every network is for everybody for
And-
different reasons.
Well, it's also, do you like BBC? Do you like CNN? Or do you like CBS? Do you like to listen to the radio? Or do you prefer Netflix? It's all a very personal experience. That's why it's social media.
Right. And
So there's no right or wrong, really, about what you do, as long as you're achieving the end result.
Right. And again,
Which is business.
LinkedIn launched their newsfeed this week. It's not even fully up and running yet, so it's going to look a lot like Facebook, except it's a business-to-business tool. People are connecting on a professional level. So I think it's probably a smart thing to do. I was approaching this evening from the viewpoint that you're not here, you're not on social media at all. I began this conversation by suggesting that you could talk about what you had for dinner and your grandchildren on your Facebook personal page, but on your business page it'd be nothing more than your business.
I agree with you.
If you're choosing to only do that on LinkedIn, you're missing the opportunity for. I don't know what LinkedIn's membership roll looks like, but I do know Facebook's is 1.19 billion, and Twitter's is 335 million, which is the second. So LinkedIn's below there somewhere. It's just a numbers thing. Yeah.
How about Instagram?
Again, we could spend the whole night talking about all of this. Yeah. And people say, you'll see in the press, people say, but the kids aren't on Facebook these days. They're jumping off left and right. Well, Mr. Zuckerberg in 10 years built the largest media company on the planet. And if you think he's sitting in some office someplace going, I don't know what we're going to do, these kids are jumping off left and right, he's got a minion of people trying to figure it out. Paper just launched last week before last. Facebook has a new mobile app. What they're telling you today is, there are no ads on it. Get on board, join us on our new app because there are no ads. But they've been trying to figure out how to monetize mobile devices for years, and now they have it. So they have a new app they've launched, and in 18 months, I promise you, there'll be ads on it. You're just going to get you used to it now. You know, you can tell an amazing brand story on Instagram, but the minute it becomes more commercial than it is now, everyone will jump, just like theoretically people are doing with Facebook. I'd advocate for all of them. If we had the time, I'd give you my insight on all of them. Andrew.
Recently, I saw a documentary that I was really inspired by, and it's 20 Feet from Stardom. And 20 Feet from Stardom is this story of the importance of backup singers. And I think what do backup singers have to do with public relations or anything to do with design? However, I would disagree. And there's a personal story with that, because even as a public relations professional, I'm probably much better at getting people on stage than I'm comfortable at being on stage myself. But the other part of that is, I think that anyone in this industry, unless you're part of the 1%, is in a way a backup singer, because what backup singers do is they create harmony, and what they do is they work within teamwork to make things happen. So when you think about the really amazing songs that, like Mary Clayton from Gimme Shelter to Darlene Love, you don't remember those songs without the backup singers. And I think the same is true for public relations professionals that really do a good job. Their work is there just as easily. Let's see, where do I go? I started my career in New York on the publishing side. I worked at Vanity Fair and Allure magazine on the editorial side. I learned very quickly that I was much too ADD to be an editor, and that my personality was a lot more in tune with public relations, because in public relations you do just a little bit of everything. So public relations, how many have worked with a public relations company before? You know, not public relations, well, the original definition for public relations is the deliberate, planned, and sustained effort to establish and maintain mutual understandings between an organization or individual and its or their publics. But that doesn't hold anything in today's world. We live in a rapidly changing world. When I started in PR 12 years ago, there wasn't even such a thing as social media. So PR professionals today are really all over the place, doing many things. It's not just media relations or placing stories, working with the media. It's also making connections, making things work that don't necessarily seem like that they would connect. Let's see, notes. I think another definition of PR is perception and reality, and making the connection between where people perceive themselves and what the reality is. Not everyone, I don't think, is ready for PR. It's an expensive investment, it costs a lot of money, and you have to be prepared to do it. You have to have the collateral material in place in order for it to work. Part of that, I think, starts with photography. Having things in place, having a good business that you can work on yourself. There's a lot of branding and connections that you can do for yourself before you're ready to work with a public relations firm. How do public relations firms work? All public relations firms work on a monthly retainer. It can depend on what your goals are and what you want, and it would cost differently if you're a manufacturer or if you're an interior designer. Let's go back to my notes. It's old school. I think that there's a great analogy with public relations too about, now, in the social media world, I think there's a lot of instant gratification. So when you post something or you have a certain fan base, you get instant gratification. Public relations is a very slow process, and you have to have a lot of patience. And so I think if you cook a nice beef stew, you want to do it in a crock pot, and you don't want to do it in a microwave, because the outcome is really different. And you know, there's a lot of patience. I've worked with clients that have had projects at certain publications for 9 or more months. And I shot a project with a client in Los Angeles in 2012, and it's just being published next month. If you're going to invest in public relations, you really have to realize that it takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, or it's not something that's going to happen instantaneously at all. Let's see. I think most design public relations companies in New York, or at least the ones that you know of, are small kind of boutique agencies. So when you hire those small boutique PR agencies, you're hiring real professionals, people that are really in the industry and know the industry. And finally, I would say, when people ask if my project gets published in a magazine, is that going to bring me more work? And I wouldn't say always necessarily that it would. You could have a really wonderful social media presence and get work that way. You could be placed in the New York Times or the Architectural Digest, and you could seem too out of reach for what your client base is. So I think really what it does is it gives you a lot of credibility as a designer, because it's other people that are recognizing your work. So that's my short little step.
Follow up with something. This might make sense of what I said about Facebook. I launched my blog 2 years ago, which is cjdellatore.com, and developed a content strategy because I wanted to write a second book. So I began testing the kinds of content and the metrics behind it, and I almost exclusively started by sharing that content on Facebook. Last month, which was 23 months of blogging, my book sold to Rizzoli. I wrote the proposal in August, September. I did it all on the back of Facebook. So I do agree that there are other platforms to utilize for different reasons, but my goal was to write a book and to generate enough interest in my writing about interior design that I could sell a book. And I got there in record time.
Bravo.
Yeah. So, I completely agree that, you have to, if you were to assess what your goals were, there'd be a different platform for every one of them. I have several goals, and so I have several platforms for different ones of them. But at the entry point, make it LinkedIn, if it's business to business, or your business Facebook business page.
You did what you needed to do, and I applaud you for that.
Thanks.
Are we doing
Questions?
I have a question for Andrew. You mentioned in the beginning of your presentation about having your own collateral materials in place before you hire a PR person. So what are those sort of collateral materials that designers can get themselves together before coming to you?
Well, I think you got, if you're an interior designer, you need to make sure that you have the right portfolio in terms of how many projects are in your arsenal. What have you done for your client base? Is it an ocean of living rooms? Because if you've not done a full if your goal in approaching a public relations professional is to have your projects published, you have to have a full project. Kitchen, bath, master bedroom, everything. And it needs to be photographed. Either scouting shots, or if the designer maybe is just starting out, they need to have it professionally photographed so they can have it for their own portfolio, as well as to show magazines.
Good, yeah. Good.
More questions?
I want to make a comment actually about something that you said, and kind of give some weight behind the term designer that you used. About 10 years ago, I knew exactly what kind of website I needed, and friends of mine said, you know exactly what you need, why don't you just get someone to build it, because you know exactly what you want it to look like. And so I found someone who could just do the technology side.
Under the hood.
And it was the first time in my life that since I exist in a world of design and art and all, I actually had never had an experience before where someone had -0 aesthetic.
Very common problem.
So my idea,
Web developer and web designer are
exactly.
not interchangeable
So I really want to
at
make
all.
that point. We're not talking about a web developer, even
No.
though you might know exactly what you want your website to look like.
But an
You really-
agency has all of that.
Right.
And that agency could be one person who is kind of like a jack of all trades, or a small collection of a few people, or a small-sized agency. There are people who do the development. There are people who do like the design, literally like with a sketch pad and a bar napkin. Like there are the aesthetic ones, and then there are the others who like talk about. There's a whole conversation that happens about a website before you even design a pixel on the screen, and that conversation is things like, who is your audience? What are your goals? Who is this for? What are the short terms? What are the long terms? There's a lot of information that one needs up front before, and then like getting to know you. That's another one. Is this design in all the things that the word design encompasses in that whole conversation? Is it reflective? Is it perfectly reflective of you? It's digital couture.
Well, that's what you bring to the table.
I try. Thank you.
Charles.
I'm having my website rebuilt, and my previous website had Flash just in the beginning of it, not the whole website. And I'm being talked out of putting Flash on it because they're telling me that not all devices will open up the Flash. Are they telling me the right thing?
Yes, they are. In 2007, when the iPhone came, I built my business on Flash. As I said, I had a lot of entertainment industry people as clients, and Flash was great for that. It was a great multimedia handler for audio players, video, those splashy intros that would preload and then click to enter. When the iPhone came out, it was obvious that the iPhone was not going to handle Flash, at least right away. And there were some of us who were crossing our fingers going, oh, someday Steve Jobs is going to like let Flash roll on the iPhone. And in 2010, he made it in a letter on the Apple website. It's still there if you Google Steve Jobs Flash. Makes it transparently clear that it will never happen. And you'd be in denial to say that Apple doesn't really like blaze the trail on that stuff. So you're being told that Flash is a no-no is 175% correct.
I completely agree with you, because I've had the first generation of iPhones, and to this day, you still cannot get on.
It'll never happen.
Any site.
Flash is a dead technology. It's the Betamax of
with
web
anything
technology.
with a Mac product,
Yeah.
Apple, you can't still.
Yeah.
If you read Steve Jobs' biography, he talks about it in the book that he had a disagreement with the people who set Adobe, who set up the platform, and they wouldn't agree to what he wanted to do business-wise, and he deigned that it would never happen.
But it was more than that. It's also, I mean, beyond two titans arguing, it was also a security threat. Flash, in terms of like if you have a form on your website collecting someone's name, email address, and all that stuff, is vulnerable to hacks, very vulnerable. So it's just not a smart option. I would avoid it.
Is there any replacement for what Flash does in the current?
It depends on in what application. You know what I mean? How would you want to use it? Like, what are you trying to achieve?
Like moving images.
Like animation?
Animation sort of thing, or like sliding, having movement on the site.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So what kind of?
CSS, which is short for cascading style sheet. A style sheet is what runs the look of your website. From everything to how wide a column is, to what typeface you're using, what's in the header, what's in the footer. The style sheet runs the show in terms of aesthetics. Between CSS and HTML, there is movement to be done. However, web design 10 years ago, it was almost like designers were trying to show off for each other and not really serving the project. So if you're going to do animation, I would suggest that you ask yourself, is this absolutely necessary? Take your ego out of the equation, and is it serving your visitor as opposed to serving you? You know, there's a lot of that. People would say to me, well, I want an animated intro and a slideshow with music. I'm thinking, well, what's the first thing you do when you see that? Where is the off button? Like, just take me to the content and cut the BS. And then they'll say, well, I know I do the same thing, but they're not going to do it on my side because I'm me. You know, like, no, they're gonna do it on yours too. So use like animation pyrotechnics very judiciously. Make sure it's absolutely necessary. Yeah.
Do you have other website builders to recommend besides Squarespace for e-commerce? And would you recommend them at all?
Yes. E-commerce, my favorite one is something called Shopify.
Yeah, I know about that. Is it a good one?
Very.
Compared to Volusion?
Shopify is definitely higher profile and seems to be more trusted. Another one is, I'm going to forget the name of it. One of my clients uses it even. I will think of it and I will tell you afterwards. It's the word commerce is in the title, but Shopify is wonderful. Very flexible and works well with WordPress, which is a platform that I use to build websites and blogs, including my own. Yes, sir?
Do you need to upgrade to HTML5?
HTML now is, like, modern HTML is really HTML5. The 5 was meant years ago to distinguish it from previous generations of HTML. But yes, I would suggest in working with your designer and developer to upgrade to the current version of HTML and CSS, the cascading style sheet. The number on CSS, it's version 3. So you want HTML5 and CSS 3. But most designers working and developers working, they just call it HTML and CSS. Yeah. Good question.
I think if you had one takeaway resource in terms of social media, there's a blog called socialmediaexaminer.com. It's out every day, and it's cutting edge information on what's changing. And the people who write it are remarkably astute.
What is the social media?
Socialmediaexaminer.com. They're like any classic content marketer. They're going to try to sell you something every 10th post on the website, and you can ignore that or not. But it's cutting edge. And you know, honestly, there's not a. I don't think Simone. I can't remember her last name. The lady who writes Copyblogger, who edits Copyblogger, says there are no social media experts. It's 10 years old, and you can't be an expert on a moving target. And it changes every 15 minutes. But if you're looking for what that update information is, that's the website.
Same with websites too. Web technology is a moving target.
Isn't there something important to be said about search optimization for websites and how to achieve that with words and meta tags and all that?
Yes.
Or else nobody finds you.
Right, about that, and Carl can speak on that too, because Carl works with Google Analytics and site maps and all that stuff. Yes, you want the proper, in terms of your website itself, the mothership, in your header, in the header tags, the meta tags for the site name and your site description. And tags are fine, but because of misuse of tags and people abusing them, Google's wise to it, and you don't want to get on Google's S list. You know what I'm saying? Because they can end you. So wear a white hat and play legit. That said, the best way is to have a great sitemap and also really good content. Content is king. Over the year, a lot of people want to know the shortcuts. What's the cliff notes? How can I be the prom queen on Google? It's like, it's not a race, it's a marathon. And the truth is, you can trick people to coming to visit you once. But if there's nothing to hold them there, what's the point? You know? So work on good content before anything else, because that's the king. Yeah. I hope that answered somewhat of your question. Okay, sure.
The reason to blog and to share that blog on your Facebook page is that it raises your Google page rank over time. And cutting back to search engine optimization. The reason to ultimately blog in the long haul is that it drives more traffic to your mother website page, and that raises your Google page rank so that when somebody Googles interior design photographer, you are on the first page and not on the 5th. Nobody ever really gets past the second page, and creating blog content and sharing that on social media will drive traffic to your website, which will raise your Google page rank. That's the short answer. There's a lot more behind it. But I help people launch blogs with content strategies. George has built a half dozen blogs that I've helped people launch. You have to really assess what your goals are ultimately, and then how do I get there via content? And I'll give you an example. I work with an interior designer who has a particular fascination with works on paper from the 20th century, mid-20th century. And so he said, how about I get on the people who buy that kind of artwork's radar? I said, so here's what I would do. Go to every exhibition in New York of a gallery or an auction house that represents that sort of work. Then you write a blog post, an informed blog post, because you're interested in it, so you can, about that auction house show, Phillips. Then you make sure that Phillips knows you've written it, and they have a Facebook business page which has 20,000 followers on it. So Phillips then says, oh, he wrote a great review about our artwork, we're going to share that on our Facebook page. And those 20,000 people who are following Phillips on Facebook are people who buy work at the gallery. That's why they're there. They want updates. And now they know there's an interior designer who has a fascination with this. Connect the dots. You've got to create content on the blog that does that for you. If I were an interior design photographer and I could identify the 20 interior designers in the country that I wanted to be working with, I'd find a way to get on their radar, and that would be my content strategy.
Also, if I could add to that, for photographers, there are two great tools that come to mind right now. One of them is called Tumblr. Have you heard of it? Yeah. It's a blogging platform, very conducive, and some great free themes in the Tumblr theme library for photographers. Another one is something called Koken, K-O-K-E-N, if you Google it. Koken is a content management system and basically a web platform specifically designed with photographers in mind. Very share-friendly. The photographs are the stars of the show, and you can drag and drop, and you have total control over the content management, what's on your front page, and they have like 6 or 7 wonderful themes. I mean, it was built for photographers. I was actually talking with an interior photographer last night about it. That's why it came to mind, so how nice that you asked now. But K-O-K-E-N, Koken, you will love it. Yeah, sure.
If you're not going to write text content with the images, Tumblr's the place to be.
If you have an event, do people read press releases anymore, or how do you?
Well, it depends on what public relations professional you ask, but I do not typically write press releases for my clients for the very reason that we're absolutely bombarded with too much information. And so the way I generally run my business is I leverage my relationships with the journalists that I have close relationships with 12 years or more. And it's really as simple like 3 or 4 line, hey, how are you? I have this information I want to share with you, instead of like, this is inspired from the dunes of the sands of, you know, I mean, people, this is an image-related business, and, you know, you want to tailor those messages that are appropriate to the publications you're pitching to, but, you know, unless you're reaching out to an audience that is not familiar with you or familiar with the brand you're promoting, I don't really think press releases work anymore. But that's, you know, my peers can say something completely differently and give you a different reason, but I don't think people have time to read that anymore. I think it's old school.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.